This is a brand new BMC URS LT, a full suspension gravel bike, and it joins a very small number of similar such gravel bikes with front and rear suspension. But is suspension on a gravel bike a good thing or a bad thing, and are you better off with a mountain bike? Well, I'll discuss all those topics in this video review, but first let's talk about performance, handling, some likes and dislikes from riding this bike for the last few weeks, my verdict at the end of the video, how it compares to some other bikes and products in this sector. But before all that, let me give you a quick recap of the BMC URS LT and the changes over the regular URS which I reviewed last year. So let's dive in. So we have a full carbon fiber frame and fork. The big detail on this bike is the geometry, so slacker and longer than a regular gravel bike and borrowing heavily from a mountain bike. And then the other defining feature is a soft tail rear end with a small elastomer providing about 10 mil of rear suspension travel. So it allows the chainstay to flex more than if that elastomer wasn't there, and works really well and gives a smoother ride than if it wasn't there. Then we have space for up to 45 mil wide tyres with 40 fitted as stock. Disc brakes, of course, through axles, got mudguard mount and 2 bottle bolts on the top tube there, and internal cable routing, all very neat. And a huge change over the regular URS is the addition of front suspension. Cue headshot comments in 3, 2, 1. So inside this massive head tube, we have a coil spring and a hydraulic damper, and it's a system developed by a company called Hi-Ride, who worked with Pinarello and Team Sky on a full suspension Dogma several years ago. Didn't last very long, but we have the internals of that system in the bike now. So it provides up to 20 millimeters of front suspension with a lockout dial on the top there. There are currently just 2 models in the URS LT range, and this is the top of the line model, and it costs £7,600, and it's well spec'd for the money. So full carbon fiber DT Swiss wheels with WTB Radler 40mm wide tyres, and we have a SRAM Force 1x crankset and brake levers, and an XO1 Eagle mullet rear end, so a massive 1052 cassette for grinding up the steeper climbs, and a wireless axis as well. Hydraulic disc brakes, and you get a bigger 180 rotor on the front too, which is a nice detail. Then a wide flared Eastern handlebar and a WTB saddle. And on the scales, this size large, without pedals or bottle cage, weighs 9.54 kilograms, which is pretty decent for a gravel bike and isn't much heavier than some road bikes. But for comparison, it's nearly 1 kilo heavier than that giant Revolt I'm currently testing, and that bike is about half the price of this one here. So quite a weight penalty over a cheaper, similarly spec'd gravel bike from another brand. There is a cheaper model, still not cheap, costing £5,700, with a similar SRAM 1x group set by using a rival crankset and brake levers and a GX Eagle rear end and alloy DT Swiss wheels rather than the carbon ones here. So there are 2 models in the range, and they both have a very distinctive pared back graphical treatment on the frame and what can only be described as a bold colour. Let me know your thoughts on the colour by leaving a comment down below. So now we're up to speed with the BMC URS LT and the changes over the old bike. Let me get changed, hit the trail and go for a ride and see how it performs. If you're familiar with the regular URS, as I am, this new bike feels just the same, virtually identical in fact. The fit, the reach, the geometry, all the same. The tool head tube remains as well, a key feature of this bike, and definitely separates it from more road focused gravel bikes. But now we have the benefit of front suspension, and my goodness me, this is so much better as a result. The old bike was good with seated comfort, but the front end was hard. Now it's much softer. That 20mm of suspension doesn't sound like much, and it's not as much as the RockShox Rudy or the new Fox fork, but it is just enough to allow you to carry more speed into rough trails, whether high-speed gravel, when the bikes bounce around beneath you, or woodland trails that you might be better off on a mountain bike, but you can now ride with more confidence, more control and more speed on this bike. And so what the suspension does is broaden the envelope of riding possibilities compared to the regular ERS and a fully rigid gravel bike like my Giant Revolt. And yes, bigger tyres go a long way to more comfort, but you can't beat the actual benefits of suspension with the big tyres, and they work in perfect harmony to give you a bike that's faster, smoother and comfier over long gravel rides. You don't really notice the suspension working, much less compared to the RockShox Rudy, which you could feel working on bigger impacts. This doesn't really have that big impact capability. It's better on gravel tracks like the one I'm riding now, or smaller routes. It can't handle the big impacts so well. The damping is well tuned, so you don't blow through a travel straight away, and even on the road, when you leave it open, it doesn't bob about, so you can lock it for the road. But my roads are so crappy and usually quite short when linking together gravel, I just leave it open all the time. Make no mistake, the front suspension redefines the bike, both in terms of how it rides and how it looks. But which is better between this and the RockShox Rudy, or which would I choose? Well, based on sheer performance alone, for me personally, the RockShox Rudy wins the crown easily. It's got more travel for a start, so it's better for riding rough terrain. It's more easy to set up and adjust. Maintenance is a more known quantity, and I don't mind the looks of the suspension fork on a gravel bike. So for me, if I was choosing, I would go for that suspension fork. I do like the way the system looks, but you are tied into the system as well. You can't change it, you can't remove it. Whereas that RockShox Rudy, you can take it off and put a rigid carbon fork on, so you can change your bike to suit different riding requirements. The other comparison that's worth talking about is this compared to a Redshift suspension stem, which I have in my own Fairlight, and the Future Shock you find on a Specialized Diverge. Now they all offer similar amounts of travel, but for me, while the comfort of the Redshift stem and the Future Shock are both extremely good, the benefits of this system is its placement between the frame and the front wheel, and that vastly improves traction and grip and control when riding off-road, whereas the Redshift and the Future Shock don't really improve traction and control. They're more about comfort. They're isolating the rider, the body, from the impacts you get through the front wheel. Whereas this is more like suspension and benefits you're riding when off-road, in the woods, on gravel tracks that you like to ride. And that suspension with the geometry of the bike, which is already very good, makes it a much more enjoyable bike to ride off-road than many other gravel bikes. Some people will be saying, just buy a mountain bike already, but I tend to disagree. For me, riding a mountain bike is about getting in the woods, riding the most technical trails you can, not riding on the road or smooth gravel. A gravel bike though is perfect on the road and smooth gravel, and with this suspension you can now tackle some more trails that you might not do on a regular gravel bike. For me, a gravel bike with suspension sort of bridges a gap between a gravel bike and a mountain bike. Gives you some of the benefits of the extra comfort that suspension provides without going to a mountain bike. And for me, there's a clear difference between the two. I want to ride a gravel bike on the road or smooth gravel and maybe some cheeky technical trails. For a mountain bike, I don't want to ride the road or smooth gravel. I want to ride the most fun trails I can find in the woods. And for me, that style of riding between the two is a big difference, and why I think there's space for a full suspension gravel bike like this alongside mountain bikes. Okay, hopefully I've given you a flavour of how a new bike rides, but now let me share some likes and dislikes from riding it for the past 6 to 8 weeks before wrapping it all up with my verdict. Firstly, I think the front suspension makes it a much better bike than the regular ERS, and much faster and much smoother and much more capable than many other rigid gravel bikes, even that Giant Revolt I've been riding. The other feature I really like, and the same with the regular ERS, is the geometry. Slacker, longer, lower, works really well on a gravel bike. If you are riding really technical trails and even riding fast, flat gravel, this geometry works extremely well. Nice and stable, nice and planted. I like the way the bike looks. I'm not really taken on the colour, but I like the lack of branding. I like to have details like the bigger 180 rotor on the front, so more control when you're riding steep trails, and a wide flared handlebar. And the gearing works extremely well for off-road. You can scale steeper climbs and bigger climbs than you can with most other gearing setups. But there are some dislikes. Firstly, the tyre clearance isn't the most generous these days. They say a 45mm tyre will fit, but these 40mm tyres are pretty tight at the back especially, so more tyre clearance would be a good thing. But thankfully you have suspension, which sort of makes up for the lack of tyre volume the bike will take. The biggest dislike does revolve around this front suspension unit. Firstly, it squeaks all the time, which is really annoying. And the other one is more around the future longevity of the system. You can't easily take it apart to adjust it for your requirements, so faster or slower rebound or a heavier or softer spring. So that for me is a real downside. I want adjustment at home I can do myself with basic tools like you can on a RockShot Rudy suspension fork. And the other one is a weight. At nearly a kilo heavier than a Giant Revolt, it's heavier than it should be for a bike of this price with this level of specification, carbon wheels and carbon frame and stuff. So a lighter platform would be good for a bike of this price in my opinion. All things considered then, the BMC URS LT is a seriously fast and highly capable gravel bike. And the addition of that front suspension makes this such a better bike than the regular URS I reviewed last year. Combine that with the geometry and the other cool features on this bike, and you have one of the best contenders in the gravel bike market right now. And if you like the idea of suspension on a gravel bike, but you don't like the prospect of a suspension fork, and you're put off by going to a mountain bike, this might just be the bike for you. Just enough suspension for extra comfort, traction and control. Of course, it won't be for everybody. Not everybody needs or wants suspension on a gravel bike, and big tyres at low pressures do go a long way to providing a smoother ride. But after riding this bike, the addition of that front suspension and the big tyres is a fantastic combination, and better than going to a bigger tyre if you like riding really rough, rocky, technical terrain. Anyway, let me know what you think of this bike by leaving a comment down below. Would you buy it? Would you consider it? I'd love to hear your thoughts as always. And if you want to see my review of the regular URS, then check out this review up here. And don't forget to subscribe by hitting this button right here. But that's all for today. Have a great day. I'll see you all again very soon.